the Open Fire podcast. Open Fire is an honest and informed dialogue on fire safety issues. We direct discussions with some of the fire industry's most prominent and recognised leaders. Your presenters are myself, Dave Calvert, Fire Consultant Operations Director at Frankum's RMS, and with me in the studio I have, it says, Fire Expert and Mr. CEO of CLM, Tom Gilbert. How you doing, Tom?
Well, good, Dave. How are you?
Yep, not too bad. Raring to go.
Good, wonderful. I think we need to change the intro a little in the future because you're very pensive about saying I'm a fire expert. And I think when we started the podcast, I probably was, and now you just can't say you're a fire expert, can you?
What would you like to be called?
I don't know, really. Maybe we'll work on it in the background.
I'm not really a fire consultant anymore. I was for 15 years, but...
You're just no good anymore. Or is it that the world's moved on so quickly and because you're old, you now can't remember stuff enough to learn?
Why are you being so hurtful so early in the episode?
I think because you've come today dressed as a magician and it's thrown me off.
Well, there's a reason for that. Is because we got some stinging criticism of all dressing the same.
We did.
From none other than Andrea
White.
Andrea White on LinkedIn. Andrea, what are you doing? You can't criticise what we're wearing.
I know. So as you can see, I took that on board by dressing in exactly the same way, and Well,
I've got to go to snooker after this. I have to go to, yeah.
So you're a snooker umpire. So who are we? Who's on the sofa today, and what are we talking about, Dave?
Okay, so we are talking to Holly Watson.
Hi.
Hello, Holly.
Deathly silence.
Holly started her career in waste compliance before moving across to the construction industry circa 2017. She started at Frankum in 2021, so full disclosure, Holly does work for us, Tom.
Not us.
For me, sorry, not for you.
You're dreaming.
And is now the Associate Director of Safety Management, leading our CDM, BSA and Health and Safety team. She holds an NEBOSH diploma and is certified member of the Institute of Occupational Health and is currently on the brink of chartership. Holly holds international memberships for the Institute of Risk and Safety Management, Association for Project Safety, and she spends all of her spare time interpreting and deciphering the new regs and providing advice on the BSA. Holly, nice to see you.
Nice to see you again.
Welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
This is Tom, fire expert.
Several times.
What amazes me at this point is that Holly is the linchpin of your BSA output as an organisation, and you had to read everything that she did. I think Holly should feel really hurt and come and work for CLM instead.
I could introduce Holly in a number of different ways, but I wanted to keep it professional.
Well done.
Holly's undoubtedly a linchpin, and today we're going to be talking about drafting of BSA safety cases, building safety cases. A hot topic. It's a topic I wanted to address particularly because we get a lot of clients asking questions. People have completed their safety cases, submitted them. They want to know what the feedback from the regulator is, all this sort of thing. So we thought we'd break it down a bit, start from the top, and then get the benefit of Holly's experience. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay, excellent. Well, do you want to just start off giving us a little summary right from the top for our listeners who may not be as enshrined in the industry as we are, about where the Building Safety Act, how long has it been around, what's it come in for, what was the objectives of it?
Sure. So obviously the Building Safety Act came in following Grenfell to basically put a new regime in place about how to design, construct and manage buildings safely. So it's primarily focused around fire and structural, but it does count for all of building regs and making sure that they're safe. So it introduces a couple of key duty holder roles. So we've got another principal designer, another principal contractor, and the client now has to work under both CDM and BSA, which causes a little bit of confusion. The Act came in 2022. It was in draft for quite a long time, so it was quite a lot of consultation. And then in 2023, they brought out all of the supporting secondary legislation, of which there are multiple pieces, and they're not particularly, the title's not particularly catchy, so I won't go into them. But yeah, it talks about occupation, high-rise buildings, and all of that sort of thing. The most important thing to remember is that the BSA applies to all buildings, not just high-risk buildings. So there's quite a lot of confusion over that in industry, that if people think their building's below 18 metres, that it's not relevant. And not all of it will be, but quite a lot of it still is. So just bear in mind.
So it's just there is a more stringent expectation on buildings that are currently in scope within the BSA, but it does, as you say, applies to absolutely everything.
Yeah, so the difference for in-scope buildings, so the high-risk buildings, that's when you need to start thinking about your occupation side of things, which is the safety cases, which we'll talk about, and that's when you need to do the gateway system for construction work. Yeah. But you still need to do the principal designer role under the BSA for non-in-scope buildings. It just doesn't involve the gateway process.
Yes, and there is a PD role that sits within the CDM Regs 2015, right?
Yeah.
And there is also a PD role that sits in BSA, and the things they do aren't actually the same, are they?
Correct. Yeah. So it's very confusing. I know why they've called them the same thing, because they've aligned the BSA with CDM intentionally.
Yeah.
The idea being that the lead designer is best placed to do both the principal designer role under CDM and the principal designer role under the BSA. Yes. So eventually, the idea being that the lead designer will do their role plus those two roles. In reality, I've not seen one instance yet, and we work across a whole network of projects. Yeah. I've not seen once that that's happened. So the CDM principal designer is about looking at the compliance of health and safety in the design, and the BSA principal designer is talking about the compliance with building regulations in design, and they are different things. The thing is, at the moment, there aren't that many people who can do both those roles because of the competencies.
Yeah, different skill set completely,
absolutely,
right?
Yeah, and in an ideal world, you'd have one person who could do both roles, and that's, I think, the intention of the name, but it's causing a lot of confusion because people are saying, well, you're appointed as PD, and I'm like, I am under this, but not this. And yeah, there's a lot of...
We've started to see that, particularly in the remedial world, where we are being asked by organisations to demonstrate our competency as a PD. And when you read the fine print, it's PD of the CDM Regs 2015.
Yeah.
Right. And I think there will be people that won't know, but obviously the BSA is fundamentally the manifestation of Dame Judith Hackett's Building a Safer Future, who coincidentally also wrote the CDM Regs. Yeah. So I think there's some that you're going to get some terminology and some crossover in those things. But it's a big thing.
It's manageable as long as you bring it up at the start when you're talking about engagement and appointment and making sure you know exactly what you're legally liable for.
Yes.
That's fine. But it's when you sort of think, oh, you think you've appointed me for something that I'm not working on, and it is causing confusion. But
you touched on a point there saying about confusion and people's understanding of it, and there is another area of confusion at the moment regarding what's classed as building works.
Yes.
Now, I'm not going to... maybe you could just explain to us what that confusion is, where that's come from, and why it's confusing people at the moment.
Yeah, so the regulations say that the Building Safety Act applies to anything that is building work. Building work is defined under the Building Regs 2010, and there's a whole host of things like a new build, erecting a new building, extension, and it goes through a whole thing. So that is building work. But then there's exemptions to it. So it's exemptions if you are removing an external door with a certain amount of glazing, or if you're just doing servicing of certain parts of sort of electrics and stuff like that. Those are exemptions. So then you have to apply that to it as well. Then you have to think about any self-certification schemes. So if you're replacing windows, for example, people will say, well, I'm self-certifying under Fencer, which is possible. That does mean that you don't have to do certain things. But then it's understanding how far Fencer goes. And we were having a discussion earlier this week about what Fencer will cover. So certain self-certifications won't cover HRBs, and they've said we're not going to allow self-certification under our name in HRBs. So then you're back to the gateway process.
Okay. And
it's understanding which part of that element they do self-certify. Is it the whole thing, or is it just the product or the installation? Or so it's a bit of a minefield. the other thing, which I suspect you're going to ask me about in a moment, is fire doors.
Only because it seems to be a common example that people throw up there is, so if I'm just putting a seal on my fire door, does that mean I've got to report it to the regulator? That kind of
and
question.
again, I think it's very project dependent, in my opinion. So if you're doing a whole suite of fire doors and replacing them, my opinion would be yes, it goes through the gateway because it's an inherent fire safety issue. So you need to check the standard, the installation, all of that. If you're just replacing one fire door, the regulator's not clear on whether that could, because to me going through an 8-week gateway process for one fire door, which takes 20 minutes to replace, seems a little bit over the top. But if you read the regulations, that's what it's suggesting you have to do. If you're replacing the hinges on a fire door, what does that mean? Well, I went to a legal conference a few weeks ago, and they were saying that somewhere in the regulations it says that if you're making it worse, if you're making the situation worse, you then have to report it. And they were reading it in a very black and white way, and said, well, you're making it worse because you've removed the fire door, so therefore the building is less safe.
So there's a temporary making it worse element, whereas the building regulations used to be about whether you're making the building worse when you've finished. Right?
Yeah, but that's their interpretation. To my mind, that's overkill, because you don't want to do an 8-week.
That's not a view you're endorsing, just to be clear.
Not in my opinion. But then it is opinion. It's not. We've had these conversations multiple times with clients, with different consultants, and also in-house, and it's just not clear. We've got someone working on the moment on interpreting it and trying to create a sort of an idiot's guide to a flow diagram to understand it properly. But because of all the definitions are in different parts of the regulations, they're in different regulations themselves. Some are in old regs, some are in new regs. They don't always sort of marry up properly, and some of it's just not. It's some of it seems overkill. So it's whether you're going to be by the letter of what's said, or whether the BSR is going to be pragmatic. I'm hoping. I've got no intel on this. I'm just hoping that the regulator will at some point bring out a list of exemptions and define it. So, if you're doing one fire door, you do or do not need to. And I don't think, the gateway system for a single fire door would be relatively simple, because you're only looking at one part of the building regs, really. But we need to know, because industry is getting confused, and some people are doing it and some people aren't. The other aspect to that is emergency works. So the regulator says if there's imminent risk to life, you can do it under emergency works. But that's all they've said. There's no further definition of that. So people are saying, well, if my fire doors aren't good enough, is that imminent risk to life? Can I do it under emergency works? Well,
probably not if you found it 3 years ago.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And also, it doesn't stop the work. You have to do the gateway process. You should just do it the other way around. So you do the work, then the gateway. So you're not getting away with it.
So it's a seek forgiveness rather than permission type.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Just moving it on, because we wanted to sort of drill down on behalf of our listeners and viewers onto the actual building safety cases. Could you just maybe give us a kind of helicopter view of where the building safety cases fit in the whole BSA framework?
So safety case reports is what we're drafting on behalf of our clients, and they are in the occupation regulations for HRBs, so only buildings above 80 metres. So the safety case itself is a suite of documents that demonstrate how the building is safe. So it could be your fire certification for your doors and stuff like that. So you're looking at a load of evidence at that point. The safety case report is the narrative that basically pulls on all that evidence to make a persuasion to the regulator, basically, that says that my building is safe because of this, and we're aware it has these weaknesses, and we have got this action plan in place to fix those weaknesses. So they're not expecting you to say, I've got the perfect building, because I don't know about you two, I've never seen the perfectly safe building. But it's about understanding what you've got and how to improve it if it needs improving. And that's what they're looking for. So it's an explanation for it.
Are these safety cases new, or have they existed in other industries previously?
I think they've existed in the oil and gas industry for a while, but for construction, they are new, and they are causing a ruckus, shall we say?
Ruckus.
I mean,
Lava.
I mean, again, it's if you understand where the author of the the precursor to the BSA comes from in the industry, where we are talking,
who we interviewed a few weeks ago,
may or may not have done, right?
Yeah, I mean, we went through a very extensive CV, and as you say, you can see where her industry
absolutely
experience came from.
And I think that the takeaway from that podcast episode with Dame Judith for me was that the oil and gas industry had their Piper Alpha, and it changed the industry overnight, instantly. Safety cases were a big part of that, and bow tie diagrams. And if you worked in fire safety in the social housing world or generally, most people never heard of a bow tie diagram, and most people never really thought about the safety cases and single points of failure and all this sort of stuff, which oil and gas have been doing since Piper Alpha happened. And actually the surprise from Dame Judith really was that hadn't happened as quickly as maybe she thought it had. And again, that whole safety case aspect is all about identifying on a building by building basis what the failure mode is of the building, really, and what it needs to do to improve the outcomes should the worst thing happen.
Do you think we can get Red Adair on as a guest?
I think we might be able to take a photograph of where he's been laid to rest.
Oh, right.
But I'm suspecting Red Adair is no longer around.
That's a shame.
He was a great guy, though, wasn't he?
Well, he's a good firefighter. I mean, I was about 7 years old when Piper Alpha happened.
Yeah, this is a guy that used to drive a truck literally into...
He's the most famous firefighter this side of Bull McCaffrey.
To be fair, I was just going to check my watch how long it took for Bull McCaffrey to turn up.
Anyway, Bull McCaffrey is the lead character in Backdraft, Holly.
Played
by Kurt Russell, of course.
Russell.
And yet you still don't know the theme tunes.
We talked about this for the episode. I'm not convinced it has a recognisable theme tune.
It does. It's all about drums. It's great. You can shoot it afterwards.
I think what we need to do is I think the music we play out of today will be the theme tune to Backdraft. Although at the back of my mind, I think it's going to cost us.
As long as you have to pay the licensing on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Should get someone to sponsor it, Dave. Sponsor the outtake. Get someone to pay for the outro.
Okay, going back to building safety cases anyway, while we've got Holly here, before we go down too much of a rabbit hole. So the process around building safety cases, obviously we know a lot of housing organisations across the country have been rapid fire, pulling safety cases together and submitting them, and are still doing so and will continue to do so for the next several years. Can you just talk a little bit about the process around putting a building safety case together?
Yep. So the regs have brought in a principal accountable person and accountable persons that sit under them, depending on which part of the building you're responsible for. So the entity who is in charge of the structure and the facade will be the principal accountable person. It's their job to put in a safety case and a safety case report. The timeline is defined as soon as practicable, once they've got an occupied building, and that has to go to the regulator. That can only go to the regulator once the regulator asks for it. So the regulator's going to ask over 5 years, and they will call in the report. Alongside that, they'll call in the mandatory occurrence report and the resident engagement strategy.
Okay.
But the report itself will, like I said, pull together all the evidence. So in terms of what a housing association or one of our clients would need to do, it's about pulling together your fire safety information, your structural information, which is often sort of put on the back burner and people neglect it. It's coming back as feedback. Structural is just as important. They want just as much detail. So it's all of that, but a really big part of it is your policies and procedures as well. So how do you engage with your residents? How do you tell them things, but also listen to them and how their views get raised and sort of prioritised? Asset management strategies, any remediation works you've done, testing and maintenance strategies, all of that needs to be in the report, or summarised at least in the report, to explain that you're managing it safely. So it's not just about what you've got, it's about how you maintain that as well. So that will then go to the regulator. They will, on their side, split that out between a structural expert, a fire expert, and a building safety expert. So that will get split their side, and then they will ask for further information where there are holes. So they're not rejecting them out of hand, is what they've told us. They will advise and ask for further information.
It's quite collaborative.
So they say. We've not been in the position to experience that, but they have said they will be collaborative. They want to help people get these across the line. They don't want to just reject them.
So are these like fire risk assessments but hyped up with more kind of fire? So if I reflect on working in an organisation that have a large multi-site portfolio, you would have individual asset fire risk assessments, and then you would have your corporate fire risk management strategy that would talk about things like resident engagement and what your process around remedials is and replacements, and what you do in the event of an emergency and how that's escalated and all that would be held centrally. Is this more about, on an asset by asset basis, dragging all that information into one document, or is it something slightly different?
It's broader than that. So it's about looking at the building as a whole. So it's the building system. So how is that system safe? It's not looking at a particular asset in detail. Yeah. Well, the evidence, the safety case will, because it will have all of the reports and evidence around that. But the report, safety case report, will bring in the explanation to the regulator. So it's persuading the regulator, we're on top of this, we've got a handle on this.
What sort of evidence, just to bear in mind, not everybody's in the same industry as we are, what sort of evidence would you expect a building owner to be able to provide or pull together in order to put all that together into a safety case?
So as a minimum, we're looking at fire risk assessments, compartmentation surveys, possibly structural surveys. It depends on the building. You've got some buildings from the 50s which may not have certain information. Mm-hmm. The regulator's not saying you have to have everything, because they're aware that some of it may just not exist because of the age of the building.
From a procedural point of view, is there anything that an owner would need to be able to demonstrate?
It's, again, asset management, remediation. Resi engagement is a massive one, and that has to be building specific. So, some housing associations say, we've got our resident engagement strategy. That's great, but that's really broad brush. We need one per building. So you need to understand exactly in your building what your resident profile is. So who's vulnerable and how you're getting them out in an emergency, and your evacuation strategy, but also your emergency planning. So one of the things from the report was that, from the inquiry, was that the emergency planning was a little bit hit and miss, shall we say. So how is the principal accountable person planning for people to get out? Where are they going to go? And it's not a case of, we've had some clients give us, this is our governance procedure. They don't want to know about what happens at governance level. They want to know about who is responsible for getting that resident from a burning building to the place where they're going to stay that evening, and that sort of thing. It's on the ground, practical management.
So when you're collating all that evidence, because obviously various documents and procedures and policies and such like, when you collate that, how do you present that to the regulator? Where would you store that? You send it in a SharePoint, or is there various options, or is it prescribed in any way?
It's not prescribed. You can present the safety case however you like. So that wider documentation, as I said, is the safety case. We sometimes get it sent by SharePoint or whatever. There are some online platforms.
You are allowed to mention your own one if you want to.
I wasn't sure. So obviously we've got the FRMS matrix.
Bleep that
out. Other platforms are available.
They're not as good. Dave, are they?
Very uber efficient and uber cheap.
Fantastic.
And lots of fun to use. Lots of fun, Tom.
It is. The thing is, it's about making sure that the information is accessible. So it's about, there are some platforms out there that we've had for years and years for construction, where you've got folders under folders under folders and nobody's sure where it is. The whole point of the safety case is that it's shareable, accessible, secure. So some of these platforms are really good, and you can just get there within 2 or 3 clicks and you've got the latest information, and that's what the regulator wants. They haven't prescribed how to do it, but they have said that it needs to meet certain standards. So in terms of shareability and things.
Okay.
Is the idea around, so I'm going to be devil's advocate for a minute now. So the idea around fire risk assessment in the inception of the fire safety order was all that it was, the idea from government was it wasn't going to be a consultant's charter, right? It was about organisations owning and understanding their own risk. And I remember the old Mrs. Miggins pie shop. She knows her pie shop better than everybody else. So she's the person that does the fire risk assessment with a little bit of support from the other documents that were readily available as guidance. Was the intent, or is the intent, do you think, of safety cases within the BSA to be for organisations to understand and own their risk and deliver this themselves? Or is it more of a case of the level of competence necessary is such that they have to outsource this stuff? Because there are large organisations that have built teams of people that are dealing with.
Well, the MHCLG in June, they did put a letter out. This was the previous government, in fairness, Rowley, put an open letter out saying that they essentially that they believed that this information already existed at most buildings,
absolutely.
And it wouldn't be especially onerous.
No, which is nonsense.
Well, patently nonsense. Yeah, I mean that's part of the problem, is that no golden thread existed for any of these buildings.
But I suppose my point is, in certain organisations, they've taken the mandate internally. They said, right, well, I need certain people and certain systems, and I need to go on a big adventure to go and find all this information out. We'll do that ourselves, rightly or wrongly. And then there are other organisations that said, well, we're not set up to deal with this, so we're going to employ an FRMS, for example, to come and support us in delivering that, or even write them for them ourselves. Where do you sit in that?
I think my opinion is that the organisation who's managing the building should understand and be responsible for that building. Different organisations, some are embracing it, some see it as a nuisance and they want it off their desk, and those are the two extremes. But I think using it's brand new, so using somebody to come in and advise on a piece of legislation, I don't think there's a problem with that.
No, not at all.
What we're saying to clients is you have to own this. We work with people, we do workshops with people, we do site visits with the site managers, so we use them in the process, so they know exactly what we're writing, they know exactly what we're putting into it, and when we provide it to them, it is their report, and it is their name on it, and they're responsible for it, and we give it to them to finish. The reason being, we're not going to put their actions in for them. So they have to be responsible for what actions they may or may not take under that. We can help them bring it together, and then we give them the responsibility to own it and to update it and all of that sort of thing, because it is theirs, it should be theirs, because we don't manage that building on a daily basis. No. They need to understand it.
So your role in that space as a consultant is giving the client the tools to be able to do their own and supporting them through the process, rather than give me an address, I'll go and write your building safety case, here you are, submit that to the regulator, which is happening, right? That must be happening.
I don't think we can fill it all in for them, because we don't know what their budget is or what they're intended to do in terms of fire door replacements and stuff. So they have to be on the journey with us. That's the most important thing.
You can provide a ghostwriting service, but essentially you need them to engage and sit down with you and talk about it. So you can steer them how it should look.
What they're providing. You know, if they can't provide me with their emergency plan, I can't write that in the report, because if they don't know it, I can't.
Of course.
I don't know it. So they have to understand the information they're providing. We can pull it together and collate it into what the regulator wants, but they have to know the information, and that's the bit that is a bit of a stumbling block sometimes, because they might know it, but it's not in the process, and they're like, it's about making sure they've got the right policies and procedures around it as well.
So you and your team have certainly completed a lot of safety cases with your clients and sent them off to regulator. Is feedback coming back yet? Have you had any feedback?
We haven't had any for any of the ones that we've done, but I've got feedback through other people, from other people's, and it's about detail.
What sort of mistakes are being made?
Not being block specific. So again, like I said, the resi engagement has to be about that block, not too generic. And lack of structural information is a massive one. So people are thinking, oh well, it's a concrete block building.
Must be okay.
Yeah, but they want to know so much more. So if you've got an undercroft car park, is that the same structural design as what's above ground? How do they marry up? What's the fire protection for the structural elements? All that sort of thing. Whereas people have really focused on fire protection rather than structural protection. It's just about making sure that you give equal weight to all of that. And the other main thing is the lack of processes and policies, so asset management policies and things like that.
So if those things are missed and the regulator comes back and is not happy, what happens then? Do they just get rejected and said not good enough, close your building?
No, they'll ask for more information. So they're hoping to assist people across the line to start with, at least.
Okay.
But industry's waiting because, we're in the early days of this. The first ones started to get called up in April.
Yeah.
So it's still early days. People are writing them all on different templates. Everyone's got a slightly different interpretation of what's needed. So as more feedback comes in, people will be able to hone them, improve them, and it will become a lot more, we know exactly what we're looking for. But this feedback that we're getting at the moment is really important because it's informing industry on what exactly we need to do to prove the safety of the building.
So is there guidance available to support the BSA and the whole process of creating safety cases? Does that exists, I assume, and it's probably readily available through the HSE, I guess.
Yep. So on gov.uk, there's a whole page of information on what it is, what you need, and then you can go through the links, and it will tell you the basic headlines that you need and what they're expecting to see under that. What they're not telling you is the level of detail. So I had someone ask the other day, well, do you need the last 3 years or the last 5 years or the last 8 years? And I sort of said, well, I need as much as you can provide to prove it's safe.
Yes.
There's no point giving me 40 years if it had a massive, if you knocked it down 2 years ago.
Yeah,
I don't need the last.
Yes.
So it's building by building, and that's not in the guidance, the level of detail. But they are saying provide enough here to show that this is safe, and so it is a little bit. It's interpretation again. It's whether you think you've convinced people.
It's interesting as a contractor, we've been asked through frameworks that we are on, and the HIDE framework, which you guys have just done that safety, the kind of Building Safety Act piece of work we've all had to do, and even within that, we as a specialist contractor are being asked what's our understanding of a safety case and what information does it include. So actually, as a specialist contractor, we're having to start to reflect on that stuff as well. And I think that web is definitely
the point is your company doesn't touch them.
And we don't do them at all, but obviously as a specialist contractor involved in buildings that are,
it's a much more collaborative exercise.
Yeah,
now,
of course.
Well, you'll be responsible for providing some of the information
Absolutely.
through the golden thread that will be inherent for that safety case.
Yeah, and I suppose it's about the specialist contractor not turning around saying, what do you want that information for? What you actually want is me to say, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I understand why you want that information.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, just to finish off, Holly, what do you see? Obviously, a lot of large organisations are putting their tranche 1 buildings through, or already have done, hopefully. What's the future of building safety cases? What do you think is going to happen over the next couple of years?
I think they'll just become much more standard. So a bit like everyone knows you need a fire strategy or you need a fire risk assessment. I think it'll be a much more people understand why, and it will become much more sort of matter of fact and the norm. I would be surprised if they didn't eventually extend it to 11 to 18 metres. Because what makes a 17.7 metre building safer than an 18 metre building? But so I think they will start to be applied to lower rise buildings as well. But I think
that was one of the came out of the part 2 of the Grenfell inquiry, wasn't it, to review the definition of an HRB.
Yeah.
So
80 metres is quite high.
Well, I don't like to give Tom credit at any stage whatsoever, but going back to just after Grenfell, he was on the BBC, got interviewed by the BBC.
I was.
And I remember at that time you were saying it shouldn't be based on the height, it should be based on the people, characteristics of the people inside.
Well, yeah, and I think that
you were a bit of a lone voice at that time, to be fair.
Well, I was, and I remember why they called me in, and it was because a council had decided that they were going to sprinkler all of their high-rise buildings, and this was within days of Grenfell Tower happening, which is a great thing to do. And the point that I made was this organisation has probably got a load of sheltered housing buildings, a load of supported housing buildings, and actually that investment would be better placed as a safety improvement to those buildings where your most vulnerable residents are. And there was, at that time, there was no holistic view of occupant demographic, which obviously the BSA started to make you think about, right? So if you're going to spend money, you should be spending it where your life risk is highest, and proportionately from a likelihood of a fire happening and the likelihood of a death as a result of that fire was always going to be in sheltered housing. And in bungalows we talked about, Dave. Right? If you're going to die in a building,
you look at the government, the stats on the government's website tells you that. That's where fatalities are. They're in bungalows,
and that's not because bungalows are inherently dangerous. It's because the majority of people that live in bungalows are over 70.
But then you're basing it on resident profile. Resident profile is changeable. So
then
you're going to have buildings falling into and then out of scope and then into scope, and that then becomes complex.
So I think the reality is Grenfell Tower has quite rightly focused the minds on buildings that are similar to it, where your ability to get it wrong, like if the catastrophe happens, the size of that catastrophe is easy for me to say, is significantly larger because of the life risk within it, right? The number and the height and the difficulty if the worst happens, as we saw on that fateful night. But I think organisations have always got to think about occupancy demographic, and I worry that this takes people away from occupancy demographic and more into asset, focus on the asset, and I think you should be doing both.
The report requires both, and some of that feedback is you haven't told us enough about the people in here.
Yes,
have you got non-English speakers? Have you got people who need assistance evacuating? And people are just sort of giving a very bland resident profile, and the regulator saying, no, I need more. Absolutely.
Well, me and Dave are going to reflect on the recommendations of the Grenfell Tower inquiry.
We will reflect and give our commentary. And
we're going to do an episode on it, aren't we, Dave?
Looking forward to it.
It will be exciting, that's for sure, for everyone that's listening.
Thanks for coming in, Holly.
You're welcome.
Very interesting. Just to check, you have signed up for the Backdraft Movie Fan Club?
I have done.
Excellent.
I haven't. I'm going.
No, you haven't. Why are you lying to me? You realise I chair that society,
I know,
so I would know if you had or not.
That's why I back.
How many people are a member of the Backdraft Appreciation Society UK chapter now, Dave?
I believe we're about 137. I believe.
Is that a lie?
It's changing by the day, so I can't
by the
keep
hour.
Up.
Have you seen a massive uptick since you've started to talk about it on the podcast?
I saw you have joined since we last spoke. You have joined.
I have joined. I think I'm the only person that's not related to you that's joined, but I feel like I'm close to being related
That's
to you.
not true. That's not true.
What's your favourite firefighter name that people have given as they joined?
I liked your... What was your one? Do I need to look it up?
So mine was actually a real fireman's name.
Oh, Les McBurney, wasn't it?
Les McBurney, yeah. There's a great still image of a fireman called Les McBurney outside a burning building.
It's a great name.
It is the best firefighter's name ever.
He had no choice. He had to be a firefighter.
He had to.
Right.
He couldn't have done anything else. He couldn't have worked in a match factory.
Can we think of a prize for the best firefighter pun name for somebody that joins up?
I think we should.
We should explain. Part of the process is you've got to put in, if you were to star in the next Backdraft movie that's coming out.
Yes.
What would your character's name be?
Yes. Which I think is a fantastic... I wasn't expecting to get grilled. I thought it would simply be, you can join because we're desperate for members. But it wasn't.
No.
There were qualifications that we had to make.
This is why there aren't more members. People aren't getting past the SIF.
They can't get past the SIF. People
lack
get
of competency,
to that.
you see.
It's the lack of competency on selection of names.
I feel Maddie's eyes burning into the side of my head.
And
so
mine.
We've run out of time.
Yes. So we'll close out then. So I think it's important to note that we are independent and neutral, and anybody that wants to get involved can message us on LinkedIn and follow our page and website. We would love to hear from you, and we'd love if you'd like to be on the show in the future, comment on anything that we've said in the past, drop us a message, and come down to the studio. And we have had lots of people, Dave, that have wanted to come on the show. And the guest list is getting longer and longer, isn't it? So we're going to have to keep doing these shows.
Well, it's an industry collaborative. We want to invite other companies. It's certainly not limited to people that are in our circle.
Yes.
Why don't you do one with your Backdraft Association?
We should do. We should get all members in it. Oh, we are. We're all here. Thank you very much for coming, and see you on the next show, Dave.
Finish off as hurtful as you started.